He had built an empire of glass and steel on a foundation of sand. And he had done it by looking away. For 12 years, Kwon Jin-woo had mistaken the org chart for the organization, the balance sheet for the business, the map for the territory. He had managed everything and noticed nothing. Now, in the space of a single morning, the tide had come in and the sand was washing away. The consequence of his blindness was total. It was absolute. The first tremor had not been the panicked calls from his bankers or the sudden, surgical betrayal of his partners. It had been a silence. The particular silence left by the one person he had never learned to listen to. The person who was gone. His hands were steady as he held the phone to his ear, a habit of control so deep it persisted even as the world dismantled itself around him. He was speaking to Prosecutor Choi, a man he despised but whose function he respected. A necessary gear in the machine of the city, Jin-woo was attempting to cauterize a wound, to manage a narrative, to do what he had always done. But the tool was blunt and the wound was arterial. Choi's voice was dry, stripped of the usual bureaucratic deference. It was the voice of a man who had just won a prize. My key informant on the Port Union case just walked into my office, surrendered himself. Jin-woo felt a cold prickle. That informant was his. A man bought and paid for, a loyal asset. He asked for protection, Choi continued, a thin sliver of satisfaction in his tone. He said 7 words. Jin-woo waited, the silence in his penthouse office suddenly vast and suffocating. The prosecutor let the moment hang, twisting the knife. Then he delivered the line. She was the only one telling the truth. By the way, wherever in the world you're watching from right now, let me know in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories reach. Okay, where were we? 7 words, the number registered with the cold precision of an accountant closing a ledger. She. The word was a ghost, an echo in the vast, empty space of his understanding. He didn't need to ask who she was. There was only one she who mattered in this context, because there was only one she his informant would have mentioned. A woman so quiet, so peripheral, she was functionally invisible. And yet, here was her name, or the implication of it, spoken at the very epicenter of his world's collapse. Kwon Jin-woo ended the call without another word and stood, looking out over the sprawling cityscape of Seoul. The city he thought he owned. The chase had begun. He was already miles behind. A map is not the territory, he remembered someone saying once. For the first time, he was beginning to understand what it meant. He had been navigating by a piece of paper, while she had been walking the earth. The night before the collapse had been a performance of power, flawless in its execution. The penthouse, occupying the top 2 floors of the unsung tower, was a testament to his control. It was less a home than a venue, a stage set for the continuous drama of his influence. Walls of glass offered a god's eye view of Seoul, the city lights a glittering carpet unrolled at his feet. The air was cool and smelled of money, a subtle blend of expensive floral arrangements, the clean scent of polished marble, and the faint, pleasing aroma of aged whiskey. 200 people, the precise number he and his team had calibrated for optimal effect, moved through the space. They were the gears of the city, politicians, financiers, rival family scions, and the cultural tastemakers who provided the glossy veneer of legitimacy. Jin-woo moved among them with an easy, predatory grace. His suit was bespoke, a dark charcoal that absorbed the light, making him a point of gravity in the glittering room. He was not a large man, but his stillness gave him immense presence. When he stopped to speak to someone, he gave them his full, undivided attention, a focused beam of interest that made them feel like the only person in the world. It was a skill he had perfected. It was also a lie. His mind was a distributed network, tracking a dozen conversations at once, assessing threats, identifying opportunities, updating the complex matrix of favors owed and debts collectible that constituted his power. He smiled at the deputy mayor, his eyes conveying warmth, while his mind calculated the precise political cost of the zoning variance he would request next week. He clapped the shoulder of a banking chairman, inquiring after his daughter's equestrian career, a detail recalled from a file, while simultaneously signaling to an aide across the room to intercept a journalist who was getting too close to a sensitive guest. He was a master of managed relationships. Everything was arranged. Nothing was left to chance. And in the corner of his eye, a fleeting data point, he saw her. Min So-yeon. She was standing near the long white marble bar, not drinking, but observing. She held a small tablet, her fingers occasionally making a note. Her official function tonight was to be invisible, to ensure the event's logistics ran smoothly from the background. The catering staff, the security detail, the valet service, they all ran through a command structure that ultimately answered to her quiet oversight. She wore a simple dark dress, her hair was pulled back, and her face was unadorned. She was a study in neutrality, designed to blend in with the shadows. He had designed her that way. When he'd first hired her, he'd told her, "Your value is in your discretion. I should never have to notice you." She had nodded, her expression unreadable, and had fulfilled that directive perfectly for 3 years. He felt a flicker of something, a low-grade irritation. She looked tired. There were faint shadows under her eyes. For a moment, he considered the sheer volume of work he had given her, the endless, thankless task of organizing the chaotic, often criminal 50-year history of the Yunsung organization, on top of managing his personal life, his properties, his schedule. The thought was an inconvenience. It was her job. He paid her exceptionally well. His responsibility ended at the transaction. He turned away, dismissing the thought, and engaged the head of the Jaehua construction family, a man whose portfolio he intended to absorb within the next 6 months. He performed his role. He smiled, he listened, he dominated. He was Kwon Jin-woo, the man who had everything under control. He saw the whole board, every piece in its place. He saw everything except the single, quiet woman by the bar who was watching him, and who was seeing something else entirely. She was not looking at the pieces. She was looking at the cracks in the board itself, and she was the only one who knew that the game was already over. The morning light was a blade, cutting through the gap in the heavy blackout curtains. Jinwoo woke with the unpleasant metallic taste of residual adrenaline in his mouth. The party had been a success, another brick laid in the edifice of his reputation. He reached for his phone on the nightstand, a reflexive gesture. The screen was dark. He frowned. It was always charging, always on. He found the cord lying on the floor, unplugged from the wall socket. Strange. He never unplugged it. He plugged it in and powered it on, a sense of dislocation prickling at him. The phone flooded with notifications, a cascade of missed calls and urgent messages. But the first thing he saw was the email. It was from Min So-yeon. The subject line was a single, neutral phrase. Final report. He opened it, expecting a summary of the party, a list of follow-up actions required. Instead, the body of the email contained only 3 sentences. The archives are now complete. My work is finished. I have taken my personal effects. That was it. No, dear Jinwoo. No, sincerely. No, 2 weeks' notice. It was not a resignation. It was a statement of fact, as cold and precise as a line item in a budget. His first reaction was not alarm, but a surge of pure, unadulterated anger. The arrogance, the inconvenience. She was his archivist, his scheduler, his domestic manager. She was a function, an employee. She did not have the right to simply finish. He had a dozen meetings today she was supposed to have prepped him for. He had a trip to Hong Kong next week she was supposed to be arranging. He threw back the covers and strode out of the bedroom into the main living area. The penthouse was unnaturally silent. The cleaning crew, which So-yeon always scheduled for 6 a.m. sharp, was absent. The scent of last night's party, stale champagne and wilted flowers, lingered in the air. On the kitchen counter, where a fresh pot of coffee and a copy of the Choson Ilbo should have been waiting, there was nothing. Just the cold, polished stone. The irritation began to curdle into a deeper unease. This was not just an employee quitting. This was a system breaking. So-yeon was the operating system for his life, running quietly in the background, so efficient he had long ago stopped noticing its existence. Now, the screen was blank. He dialed her number. It went straight to a disconnected message. He tried her secondary phone. Same result. He called the head of his personal security detail, a man named Kang. "Where is Min So-yeon?" Jinwoo's voice was clipped, tight with suppressed fury. There was a pause on the other end. "Sir," Kang said, his voice strained. Her access credentials were deactivated at 3:17 a.m. All of them. Building, network, vehicles. She is gone. "Find her," Jinwoo snapped. "I'm not asking, Kang." "We're trying, sir, but her residence has been wiped. There's nothing to go on. It's like she was never there." Wiped. The word echoed the sterility of the kitchen counter, the silence of the apartment. This was not an emotional departure. This was a tactical withdrawal. He hung up, his mind racing, trying to recategorize the event. This was not insubordination. This was something else. And as he stood there, trying to calculate his next move, the phone rang. It was Lee Jang-ho, the chairman of the consortium funding his massive Yeongjong Island resort project. Jinwoo's world, which had been tilting for the last half hour, began to fall. The call from Lee Jang-ho was the first domino. His voice, usually obsequious, was tight and formal. "Jinwoo-si, we have a problem." Jinwoo hated that suffix. It was politely disrespectful, a deliberate choice to frame him as a junior, a mere businessman, not the head of a powerful family. "We're pulling our financing from the Yeongjong project," Lee said, without preamble. Jinwoo's mind went into immediate crisis mode. "On what grounds, Chairman Lee? The preliminary reports are flawless. The geological surveys are solid." He was already thinking about leverage, about which of Lee's personal indiscretions he could deploy. "There are concerns," Lee said, the vagueness of the word an insult. "Concerns about the foundational integrity of the entire enterprise." The phrase was bizarrely specific. Not financial risk, not political headwinds. Foundational integrity. "That's absurd," Jinwoo countered. "Our engineering is the best in the country." "The issue is not with your engineers," Lee said, and for the first time, a note of something like pity entered his voice. "The issue is with the ground the foundation is built on. The documentation is incomplete. We are exposed. The consortium is unanimous. The credit lines are frozen, effective immediately." He hung up. Jinwoo stared at the phone. Incomplete documentation? Impossible. The Yeongjong project was his masterpiece, the crowning achievement of his legitimate business portfolio. Every permit, every survey, every contract had been scrutinized. And the person who had managed that entire mountain of paperwork, who had cross-referenced every clause and secured every signature, was Min So-yeon. He felt a jolt, a connection forming between two disparate events. Her departure, a project's collapse. It felt significant, but the shape of it was still unclear. Before he could process it, the phone rang again. A private number. It was the vice president of a Swiss bank where the Unsung family held its most discreet assets, the generational wealth that was the true bedrock of its power. The banker's voice was clipped, panicked. "Mr. Kwon, we have a problem. We've received a flag from the international regulators, an inquiry on the source of funds for account 7B-4. They are citing a credible tip about structural irregularities." Structural irregularities. There it was again. A variation on a theme. Foundational integrity. These were not the words of finance. They were the words of architecture, of engineering. It felt like a message. "What was the nature of the tip?" Jinwoo demanded. "Anonymous," the banker replied, "but highly detailed. It included transaction codes from 5 years ago. It was forensic. They knew exactly where to look. We have to lock the account, Mr. Kwon, by law." The line went dead. Jinwoo felt a wave of cold dread wash over him. Transaction codes from 5 years ago. No one had that level of granular detail. No one but the person who had spent 3 years digitizing and organizing his family's entire financial history. The person who had built the archive. Then the third call. Park Min-jun, his second in command, his most trusted lieutenant, the man he considered a brother. Min-jun's voice was a balm of calm competence in the rising sea of chaos. "Hyungnim," he said, using the respectful term for older brother. "I've been hearing whispers. Our people in the prosecutor's office are getting nervous, and I just got off the phone with our partners in Macau. They're spooked." "What are they saying?" Jinwoo asked, his own voice sounding distant to his ears. "It's all vague," Min-jun said, his tone laced with frustration. "A loss of confidence. It's as if someone has planted a seed of doubt everywhere at once. Don't worry, I'm handling it. I'm calling a meeting of the captains for tomorrow to stabilize the situation. We'll project strength. We just need to ride this out. I'm on your side, always." The words were reassuring. They were exactly what Jinwoo needed to hear. And they were a complete and utter lie. Min-jun was not putting out the fire. He was fanning the flames. The final call, the one that broke everything open, was the one he made himself. To Prosecutor Choi. It was a call of last resort, an attempt to use the blunt instrument of the law to find out who was attacking him. And it led to those 7 words from a traitorous informant, the words that landed like a physical blow. She was the only one telling the truth. She, Soyeon. It all snapped into focus, a horrifying, crystalline clarity. This wasn't a series of unrelated crises. It was a single, coordinated, brilliantly executed attack. And it wasn't an attack on him. It was a vacuum. Soyeon hadn't attacked him. She had simply left. And in doing so, she had revealed that she was not a peripheral employee. She was the load-bearing wall of his entire empire. And he, in his arrogance, had never even seen her. The full weight of Prosecutor Choi's words settled on him, not as an accusation, but as a diagnosis. He was blind. He had been blind for years. The realization didn't come with a flash of anger or a surge of panic, but with a profound, hollowing calm. The chaos of the morning receded, replaced by a single, stark imperative. He had to understand. Not to retaliate, not yet, but to understand the sheer scale of his misjudgment. He walked through the silent penthouse, his footsteps echoing on the marble floors. The grand living space, which hours ago had felt like the pinnacle of his power, now seemed like a museum of his own folly. The expensive art on the walls, the bespoke furniture, the panoramic view of the city. It was all just a stage set, a map. And the person who knew the territory was gone. He made his way to the West Wing, to the suite of rooms that had served as Min So-yeon's apartment and office. It was connected to the main residence by a short, unadorned hallway, a passage he had walked perhaps 3 times in 3 years. The door was unlocked. He pushed it open and stepped inside. The air was cool and still, holding a faint, clean scent of lemon and old paper. The space was comprised of 2 rooms, a small, functional living area with a bedroom, and a larger office dominated by a massive, custom-built desk and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. But the bookshelves were empty. Every single book, binder, and file was gone. The desk was a vast, empty plane of polished oak. The powerful computer workstation, the multiple monitors, the printers, the scanners, all of it had been removed. There were no stray papers, no forgotten pens, no personal photographs. There was no sign that a human being had lived and worked here for 3 years. It was not just empty, it was sterile. It was an absence so complete it felt like a presence, a loud declaration. He walked into the small living area. The bed was neatly made. The closet was open, revealing a row of empty hangers. The small bathroom was scrubbed clean, the medicine cabinet bare. He had a sudden, vivid memory of her, a fleeting image from a few months ago. He'd been storming through his own office, furious about some minor error made by a subordinate, and had burst into her workspace without thinking. She had been standing by her window, watering a small, delicate orchid. She had looked up at him, startled, her expression one of quiet composure, and had simply waited for him to speak. He had barked his order and left, not even registering the plant or the quiet moment he had interrupted. Now he looked at the windowsill. The orchid was gone. Of course it was gone. It was one of her personal effects. He returned to the office, the heart of the void. He ran his hand over the clean surface of the desk. He had paid for this desk, had it designed to her specifications to handle the sheer volume of her work. He had seen it as a tool he had provided for a functionary. He had never once considered what it meant to her, to sit here day after day, night after night, piecing together the broken history of his family, bringing order to the violent chaos of his legacy. He had seen her as an archivist. He had failed to see that an archivist is a truth teller. They don't just organize the past, they reveal it. By putting things in their proper order, they expose the lies. And then he saw it. The only object left in the entire suite of rooms. On the dead center of the immense, empty desk lay a single, old-fashioned library card. It was made of thick, cream-colored cardstock, slightly yellowed at the edges. It was not one of his. It was from a public library. Typed neatly in the center of the card was a single line of text, a Dewey Decimal Classification number, 910.4. He stared at it. It was a clue. This entire surgically clean departure was not an act of spite. It was not a retreat. It was an invitation. It was the beginning of a trail he was meant to follow. A cold certainty settled in his bones. She hadn't just left. She had laid out a lesson plan. And the tuition was going to be the complete and utter dismantling of his world. He had to follow. He had no other choice. Because he finally understood that the answer to who was destroying him and the answer to who could save him were the same. And it all began with a number on a library card. The memory arrived unbidden, sharp and clear as the winter air on the night it happened. It was 3 years ago, a week after he had finally, brutally, consolidated his power as the head of the Unsung family. The final battle had been against his own uncle, a protracted, ugly affair that had left 3 men dead and a dozen loyalties shattered. He had won. He was the chairman, the boss, the final word. But he was exhausted, hollowed out by the violence and the paranoia. That night, he had done something he hadn't done in a decade. He dismissed his driver and his security detail and took the subway. He wanted to feel the anonymous rumble of the city, to disappear into the crowd, to be just a man on a train, not a king on a throne. He wore a simple black coat and a baseball cap pulled down low. He found a seat on the last train on the Bundong line, the car half empty with the weary, late-night travelers of a city winding down. The train rocked and swayed, a lulling, mechanical rhythm. He stared out the window at the blackness of the tunnel, his own reflection a ghostly presence in the glass. He felt nothing. The victory had been necessary, but it had brought no satisfaction. It was just the grim closing of one bloody chapter and the opening of another. He had arranged the pieces on the board to his advantage. He had executed his strategy, but there was no joy in it. A map is not the territory. The thought, a quote from some book he'd half read in college, surfaced in his mind. He was the master of the map, but the territory felt alien, hostile. He must have closed his eyes. When he opened them, he was aware of a faint, warm pressure on his left shoulder. He turned his head slowly. A young woman, a student by the look of her, had fallen asleep, her head coming to rest against him. Her face, in repose, was peaceful, stripped of the city's defensive mask. She had a smudge of ink on her cheek, and her dark hair fell across her face. In her lap, held loosely in her hands, was a book of modern Korean poetry. He felt a surge of pure, unadulterated annoyance, an invasion of his personal space. His first instinct was to shove her off, to wake her with a sharp word. His entire life was built around maintaining distance, control. This was a breach. But he hesitated. Something in the utter vulnerability of the gesture, the simple, unconscious trust of a stranger, held him still. He looked at her, really looked. She was probably in her early 20s. Her coat was simple, functional. Her hands were plain, her nails unadorned. She was just a girl, tired after a long day of studying or working a thankless part-time job. She was part of the territory he never saw, one of the millions of lives that moved around his, oblivious to his power, and he just as oblivious to their existence. He sat perfectly still, a statue of black-coated stillness, letting her sleep. For the next 5 stops, he became the guardian of her rest. When a group of loud, drunken salarymen got on, he gave them a look so cold and absolute, they instinctively quieted and moved to the other end of the car. He, Kwon Jin-woo, who could command assassins and topple politicians, was using his power to protect the sleep of a girl on a train. The absurdity of it was not lost on him. At Jukjeon Station, the train's lurch as it slowed finally woke her. She lifted her head, blinked, and then a wave of horror and embarrassment washed over her face. She shot upright, her cheeks flushing a deep red. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice mortified. "I am so sorry. I was so tired. I apologize." She bowed her head repeatedly, unable to meet his eyes. He just looked at her. He said nothing. The doors hissed open. She gathered her book in her bag and practically fled from the train, bowing one last time from the platform before turning and disappearing into the station. He watched her go. He felt a strange sense of loss, a disruption in the sterile equilibrium of his world. He had been a stranger's pillow, a moment of unplanned, unmanaged human contact. The next day, he gave his security chief, Kang, a task. The last train on the Bundong line last night. Jukjeon Station, around 12:45 a.m. A young woman, early 20s, student. She got off there. Find her. Kang, accustomed to locating rival gangsters or corporate spies, was taken aback, but his face remained impassive. "Yes, sir. Any other details?" "She was carrying a book of poetry," Jinwoo said. 2 days later, Kang handed him a file. Min So-yeon, a graduate student in archival and information science at a top university. an orphan, raised by her grandmother who had passed away 2 years prior. Top of her class. No debt, no vices, no significant relationships. A quiet, solitary life. The file included a photograph, the same face he remembered from the train. He looked at the file for a long time. He should have dismissed it. It was a whim, a momentary curiosity. But he didn't. He saw her field of study, archival science. He thought of the decades of unsung family history, business dealings, contracts, ledgers, photographs, letters, stuffed into a dozen dusty, disorganized rooms in the old family compound. A chaotic, unsearchable mess. A liability. An idea formed, cold and practical. He could use her. He could take that moment of random human connection and turn it into a transaction. He sent for her. She arrived at his office, nervous but composed. He offered her a job, to build an archive, to take the chaos of his family's past and impose order upon it. He offered her a salary that was 5 times what she could ever hope to make in a public institution, and a small apartment in the West Wing. He laid out the terms of the transaction. She listened, her dark, intelligent eyes watching him. When he was finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then she asked a single question. Why me? He could have told her the truth, that he was intrigued by her, that the moment on the train had stuck with him, but that would be to admit a vulnerability, a crack in his armor. So he lied. My team vetted you, he said, his voice cold and impersonal. Your academic record is impeccable. You are qualified and you are discreet. It is a simple business decision. He saw a flicker of something in her eyes, disappointment perhaps, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. She nodded. I accept, she said. And in that moment, the transaction was complete. He had taken the one genuine, uncalculated moment he had experienced in years and monetized it. He had seen her, for an instant, on the train, and then, for the next 3 years, he had made a point of looking away. The Dewey Decimal number was a key, but one he didn't know how to use. 910.4. It was just a string of digits, meaningless in isolation. Jinwoo was a man who solved problems with leverage, with money, with force. He was not a man who solved puzzles. His first instinct was to delegate, to have one of his intelligence analysts run the number, cross-reference it, and deliver a solution. But he stopped himself. The sterile emptiness of her apartment, the deliberate placement of the card, this was a test. Her test. The rules were hers. He had to do this himself. He pulled out his phone and typed the number into a search engine. The results were immediate. Dewey Decimal 910.4. Accounts of adventure and travel. Shipwrecks, buried treasure, exploration. It was a category, not a location, a dead end. He frowned. Soyeon was never imprecise. The clue had to be more specific. He thought about the card itself, an old physical library card. Not a number in an email, but an object. The object was part of the message. He thought back, sifting through the few personal details he knew about her, details he had absorbed passively from her personnel file or from overheard snippets. Her grandmother had raised her in Suwon. She had attended university in Seoul. Where would she have gotten a card like this? A public library from her childhood, perhaps? It was a long shot, a guess. But it was the only thing he had. He walked out of his silent penthouse, took the elevator down to the garage, and chose not his armored sedan, but a discreet, anonymous black Hyundai. He drove himself, another act so foreign it felt like a disguise. He drove south, towards Suwon, the city of his own birth, a place he hadn't visited in years. The drive was an hour of forced stillness. He was used to being driven, to using that time to make calls, to issue commands. Now there was only the road and the silence in the car. It gave him time to think. He thought about the phrase, foundational integrity. It wasn't just his project that lacked it. It was him. His entire structure was built on transactions, not relationships. On fear, not trust. Soyeon had been the only one who wasn't afraid of him. She had just been disappointed. He was beginning to understand that her disappointment was a more potent, more destructive force than any rival's hatred. He found the library in an old neighborhood of Suwon, a low brick building he must have passed 100 times as a boy. It smelled of dust and old paper and floor wax, a scent that was both nostalgic and alien. He walked to a directory on the wall, Section 900, History and Geography. He found the aisle and walked along it, his expensive leather shoes silent on the linoleum floor. He ran his fingers along the spines of the books. 910.1, 910.2, 910.3, and then 910.4. It was a small shelf filled with worn copies of Treasure Island, accounts of Shackleton's expeditions, stories of famous shipwrecks. It was a shelf for boys dreaming of adventure. He looked at the books, but he knew the answer wasn't in them. The clue was the shelf itself. He knelt down, his knees protesting, and looked behind the row of books. Taped to the back of the shelving unit was a small, plain white envelope. His heart beat a little faster. He had passed the first test. He pulled the envelope free and stood up, tucking it into his coat pocket. He walked out of the library, back into the cold afternoon air without opening it. He would follow her rules. He got back in the car and drove to a nearby park, parking under the bare branches of a ginkgo tree. He opened the envelope. Inside was not a letter, but 2 items. A ticket for the KTX, the high-speed train from Seoul to Busan, departing in 3 hours. And a small brass key with a plastic tag. On the tag was a number, B73, Busan Station, Locker B73. There were no instructions, no explanation, just a destination and a key. She was controlling his movement, his time. She was making him travel the country on her schedule. For a man accustomed to private jets and helicopters, the thought of taking a public train, of sitting in a numbered seat, was deeply irritating. But the irritation was tempered by a new, unfamiliar feeling. A grudging respect. This was a plan. A meticulous, carefully constructed plan. She had prepared this trail long in advance. She had anticipated his every move. She had known he would be forced to follow. He drove back to Seoul, to the gleaming, cavernous expanse of the central station. He walked through the crowds, just another anonymous man in a dark coat. He found his platform, his car, his seat. As the train pulled out of the station, accelerating smoothly toward the south, he looked out the window at the blur of the city. He was moving, but he was not in control of his destination. He was following her map. And he had a sinking feeling that this journey was not just about uncovering a corporate betrayal. It was a pilgrimage. And it was taking him further and further away from the man he had been, and closer to a truth he had spent his entire life avoiding. The territory was vast, and he was just beginning to learn how to read the signs. The 2.5-hour journey to Busan passed in a blur of disciplined thought. Jinwoo did not look at his phone, which had been buzzing intermittently with frantic messages from his lieutenants. He did not think about the collapsing financial structures or the wavering loyalties of his captains. That was the old world, the world of the map. He was in the territory now, and the territory demanded his full attention. He focused instead on So-yeon. He tried to reconstruct her, not as an employee, but as a person. He replayed their sparse interactions over the past 3 years. Her quiet, "Good morning, sir," as she passed him in the hall. The way she would place a file on his desk without a word, the relevant page already marked. The time he'd seen her in the staff kitchen, patiently explaining a complex accounting discrepancy to a junior member of his finance team. Her voice calm and clear. He had seen these moments as evidence of her efficiency. He now understood they were evidence of her character. She was patient. She was precise. She was kind. These were qualities he had long ago dismissed as weaknesses. Now they were the very qualities that had given her the power to undo him. The train slid into Busan Station, and he disembarked into the bustling energy of the port city. The air smelled of salt and diesel. He located the B wing of the locker bay and found number 73. The small brass key slid into the lock with a satisfying click. He opened the metal door. Inside was another envelope, identical to the first. He took it and closed the locker, leaving the key in the lock. He walked out of the station and found a quiet bench overlooking the harbor, the late afternoon sun glinting off the water. He opened the envelope. Inside was a single, elegantly printed business card. Gallery Loon, it read. Proprietor, An Suk-ja. Below the name was an address in the Haeundae district. He recognized the name. An Suk-ja was a legend in the Korean art world, a famously reclusive and discerning collector who had built a small but priceless collection of modern and contemporary Korean art. He had tried to buy a painting from her once, a minimalist piece by Lee Ufan. She had refused his offer without even granting him a meeting, sending back a message that her art was not for speculators. The rejection had stung his pride. And now, So-yeon was sending him to her. He took a taxi to the gallery, a discreet, modernist building tucked away on a quiet side street. The door was locked. He rang the bell. After a long moment, the door was opened by an elderly woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a severe, elegant posture. It was An Suk-ja herself. She looked him up and down, her expression unreadable. Kwon Jin-woo, she said. It was not a question. You are expected. She led him through the gallery, a series of serene, white-walled rooms where paintings hung like meditations. The silence was absolute. She did not offer him tea. She did not ask him to sit. They stopped in front of a large, abstract canvas, a swirl of deep blues and blacks. She spent 2 months here last summer, An Suk-ja said, her voice as crisp as dry leaves. She contacted me, offering to catalog my collection. I was skeptical. I have my own experts. But she was persistent. She said she would work for free. Jinru listened, his hands clasped behind his back. She worked 12 hours a day, the old woman continued, her gaze fixed on the painting. She was the most meticulous human being I have ever met. She didn't just record the details of each piece. She researched its history, its previous owners, the materials the artist used. She paid attention. The kind of attention most people reserve for a lover, she gave to my paintings. She paused, then turned to look at him directly, her eyes sharp. On her final week, she came to me with a report on this piece. A Park Seo-bo from his early period. It has been in my collection for 30 years. It has been authenticated by the top 3 experts in the country. She told me it was a forgery. Jinwoo raised his eyebrows. She found a single discrepancy, An Suk-ja said. A pigment. A particular shade of cobalt blue. She had discovered, through reading the artist's private journals in a university archive, that he had stopped using that specific pigment from that specific German manufacturer 6 months before this painting was supposedly made. No one had ever noticed. It was a perfect copy in every other way, but the color was wrong. She let the story settle in the quiet room. She was right, of course. We did a chemical analysis. A fake. A brilliant one, but a fake. She saved me from a profound embarrassment, and more importantly, she honored the truth of the artist's work. When I asked her how she knew to look so closely, she said something I will not forget. An Suk-ja's eyes bored into his. She said, "Most people see what they expect to see. The secret is to expect nothing. Then you can see what is actually there." The words hit Jinwoo with the force of a physical blow. That was his flaw, his blindness, distilled into a single sentence. He saw what he expected to see: a quiet employee, a functional asset, a map of his own design. He had never once looked to see what was actually there. An Suk-ja walked over to a small lacquered table and picked up a thick, sealed manila envelope. "She left this for you," she said, holding it out. "She also told me to give you a message." "What is it?" Jinwoo asked, his voice low. "She said to tell you that sometimes the most valuable territory is the one everyone else has dismissed as worthless." He took the envelope. It was heavy. "Thank you," he said. An Suk-ja simply nodded. "I hope you learn the lesson she is trying to teach you, Kwon Jinwoo. It is clearly an expensive one." She showed him to the door. As he stepped out into the twilight, she spoke one last time. "She was a remarkable young woman. You were a fool to lose her." The door clicked shut, leaving him alone on the quiet street. He stood there for a long time, the weight of the envelope in his hand a tangible measure of his failure. He had come here expecting another clue in a puzzle. He had received a parable instead. A parable about the value of paying attention. He opened the envelope. Inside was not another ticket, but a sheaf of legal documents. It was a geological survey and a set of mineral rights claims for a tract of barren mountainous land in Gangwon province. He recognized it immediately. It was a piece of land his own grandfather had bought decades ago, long written off as useless. But the documents Seolyeon had prepared, filed under a holding company he'd never heard of, told a different story. The survey she had commissioned, quietly, with her own money, showed one of the richest deposits of rare earth minerals in the entire peninsula. Minerals essential for the high-tech industries he was so desperate to dominate. He had owned a gold mine and had never known it, because he had never bothered to look at the ground beneath his feet. She had. The trail from Busan did not lead to another major city, but inland, to the misty, rolling hills of Hadong County, famous for its wild green tea. The documents from An Suk-ja had contained one other item, tucked within the geological reports: a small, hand-drawn map to a place called the House of Quiet Rain, and a name, Master Hyun. Jinwoo chartered a car, the first exercise of his old power in 2 days, and the drive took 4 hours, climbing into the mountains as the landscape grew wilder and more serene. He was moving deeper into the territory, further from the familiar grid of the city. The House of Quiet Rain was not a grand estate, but a simple traditional hanok, a series of interconnected wooden buildings with tiled roofs set in a perfectly manicured garden. A small stream gurgled nearby. The only sound was the wind in the bamboo grove. An elderly man in simple gray robes met him at the gate. He had a long white beard and a face of profound calm. It was Master Hyun. Like An Suk-ja, he was expecting him. "Welcome, Kwon-si," he said, his voice soft. "She said you would arrive before the evening mist." He led Jinwoo not into the main house, but to a small, separate pavilion overlooking a terraced tea field. Inside, a traditional tea ceremony set was laid out on a low table. "Please," Master Hyun said, gesturing for him to sit on a cushion. Jinwoo, accustomed to commanding rooms, found himself folding his legs awkwardly, his suit jacket bunching around his shoulders. He felt large and out of place. Master Hyun began the ceremony, his movements fluid and precise, each gesture imbued with decades of practice. He warmed the pot, rinsed the cups, measured the delicate green leaves. He said nothing. The silence was not empty. It was full, charged with the quiet ritual. Jinwoo found his own frantic thoughts beginning to slow, his breathing deepening to match the deliberate pace of the old man's movements. Finally, Master Hyun poured a small cup of the pale green liquid and pushed it across the table toward him. "This is ujeon," he said. "First flush, picked before the spring rains. It is the most delicate." Jinwoo drank. The tea was subtle, complex, with a clean, sweet aftertaste. It was the best tea he had ever tasted. "She was here for a month last autumn," Master Hyun said, as if continuing a long conversation. "She asked to learn the way of tea. It is not a thing one learns in a month. It takes a lifetime. I told her this. She said she did not have a lifetime. She only had a month." He poured himself a cup. "Most people who come here want to be served. They want the experience of the tea ceremony. They want to consume the peace I have cultivated here. She was the first person in many years who did not want to be served. She wanted to learn how to serve. She had the patience for it, a rare quality." He refilled Jinwoo's cup. She would spend hours just learning how to hold the pot, how to pour the water at the correct temperature so as not to scald the leaves. She said it was about respect. Respect for the leaves, for the water, for the person you are serving. She said most of the world's problems come from a lack of respect. Jinwoo thought of the way he had treated her, the way he had treated everyone, as instruments, as functions. He had never once considered the concept of respect. He had only understood the concept of utility. "On her last day," Master Hyun continued, "we sat here, in this room. She performed the ceremony for me. It was not perfect. Her hands were still a little clumsy, but her spirit was correct. She was fully present. Her attention was complete. Afterward, she told me why she had come." He looked at Jinwoo, his eyes clear and direct. "She said she worked for a very powerful man who had built a very large house on a very weak foundation. She said she was afraid the house would collapse and crush many innocent people. She said she needed to learn how to build something that could stand on its own." The old tea master reached into the sleeve of his robe and pulled out a small silk-wrapped package. He placed it on the table between them. "She left this for you. She said you would understand it." He paused. "She also said to tell you something. She said, 'A gift given without expectation is a true gift. A service rendered without demand is true service.' She learned that here." Jinwoo looked at the silk package. He felt a profound sense of shame. He had given her a job, a salary. He had seen it as a generous gift. But it had come with 1,000 expectations, 1,000 demands. It was not a gift. It was a cage. He reached out and took the package. It was heavier than it looked. He bowed his head to the tea master, a gesture of genuine respect, the first he had offered in years. "Thank you, master," he said. The old man simply nodded. "The path to the truth is often circular. Do not be discouraged if you find yourself back where you started. The point is not to arrive, but to see the place for the first time." Jinwoo drove away from the House of Quiet Rain as dusk settled over the mountains. He pulled over on a deserted stretch of road and unwrapped the silk package. Inside was not a document, but a hard drive. A simple, black external hard drive. And a single sheet of paper with a handwritten address on it. an address for a self-storage facility in an industrial district on the outskirts of Seoul. He was going back to where he started. But the tea master was right. He was not the same man who had left the city 2 days ago. He had been stripped of his power, his certainty, his arrogance. He had been forced to listen. He had been forced to learn. He was beginning, just beginning, to see the territory. And he knew, with a cold, sinking feeling, that the hard drive in his hand contained the heart of it, the truth, the full, unvarnished, devastating truth. The self-storage facility was a place of profound anonymity, a grid of corrugated metal doors under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights. It was a place where people stored the parts of their lives they didn't want to look at: old furniture, forgotten hobbies, broken relationships. Jinwoo found the unit number from the slip of paper. The address was not under his name or hers, but under a pseudonym, Jung Do-jeon, the name of a brilliant, ruthless 14th century Korean political strategist, a scholar who built a dynasty for a king. The irony was not lost on him. The lock was a simple combination lock. The combination was the Dewey Decimal number, 9104. He dialed it in, and the lock sprang open. He lifted the metal door, and the light inside flickered on automatically, revealing the space within. He had been expecting chaos, a jumble of boxes. But this was not chaos. This was an archive. It was a perfect miniature replica of her office, but more dense, more focused. The 10 by 20 foot space was lined with industrial shelving. On the shelves were rows of gray, acid-free archival boxes, each one neatly labeled with a date range and a project code. In the center of the room was a simple metal desk and a chair. On the desk was a laptop computer and a single, high-capacity hard drive dock. It was the hard drive from Master Hyun. It was the key. He plugged the drive into the dock and powered on the laptop. The screen came to life, showing a simple, clean desktop. There was only one folder on it. It was labeled The Map. He clicked it open. Inside was a universe of data, a perfect, mirrored schematic of his entire organization. But it was a schematic he had never seen before. It was a shadow history. For 3 years, while Soyeon had been building the official Unsung archive, the one he had commissioned, the one meant to legitimize his family's history, she had been building this one in parallel. A secret ledger. He started clicking through the files, his breath catching in his chest. It was all there. Every discrepancy he had dismissed as a clerical error, every whispered rumor he had ignored, every red flag his own auditors had been paid to overlook. She had found them all. She had traced them. She had documented them. She had followed the money. The files were organized with a terrifying forensic clarity. There were spreadsheets that showed small, almost imperceptible diversions of funds from construction projects, skimmed amounts that added up to millions over years. There were audio files, secretly recorded conversations between his suppliers and a third party, negotiating kickbacks. There were encrypted messaging logs, ghost payroll records, and shell corporations based in Panama and the British Virgin Islands. It was a symphony of corruption, played so quietly he had never heard the music. And every single thread, every skimmed dollar, every secret negotiation, every ghost company led back to one single, unbelievable nexus point. The architect of this shadow empire, this massive, silent betrayal, was not a rival family. It was not a foreign entity. It was the man he trusted most in the world, his second in command, his brother, Park Min-joon. The name on the screen seemed to mock him, Park Min-joon, the man who had stood by his side during the war with his uncle, the man whose advice he had relied on for a decade, the man who had called him just yesterday, his voice a balm of calm competence, promising to fix everything. "I'm on your side, always." The memory of those words made him physically sick. Minjun hadn't been putting out the fire. He had been the one who lit the match. And he had used Jinwoo's own blindness as the fuel. The evidence was irrefutable, compiled with a patience and precision that was almost inhuman. So-yeon had built a case so perfect, so airtight, that no lawyer could refute it, no judge could dismiss it. She had cross-referenced flight manifests with offshore bank transfers. She had matched the creation of shell companies with Minjun's vacations to the Cayman Islands. She had even found the original source code for the accounting software Minjun had commissioned for the company 10 years ago, and had a forensic analyst report showing the back doors he had built into it from the very beginning. He had been planning this for a decade of perfect loyalty, of flawless performance, a long, patient game. Jinwoo sank into the metal chair, the cold seeping into his bones. He felt like a fool, a blind, arrogant, trusting fool. He had demanded loyalty, but he had never inspected it. He had assumed it, like he assumed the sun would rise. He had looked at Minjun and seen what he expected to see, a loyal lieutenant, a reflection of his own strength. He never bothered to look at what was actually there, a patient predator, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And So-yeon, quiet, invisible So-yeon. She had seen it all. While he was busy building his empire of glass, she had been excavating the rotten foundations. She had been paying attention. He clicked on the final folder in the archive. It was labeled Contingencies. Inside were 2 subfolders. The first was labeled Path A. He opened it. It contained a single, password-protected file. The password hint was a question. The name of the girl on the train. He typed it in. Min So-yeon. The file opened. It was a simple text document containing a single address. A small, remote temple on a mountainside in Gangwon province. An address for him. The second folder was labeled Path B. He clicked on it. It contained a compressed file, already addressed to the personal email account of Prosecutor Choi. The subject line was, Evidence, the unsung organization internal corruption case. She had prepared 2 paths. One was for him, a trail of breadcrumbs designed to teach him the truth, to give him the chance to see. The other was a surgical strike, a package of evidence that would have sent him, Minjun, and his entire family to prison for the rest of their lives. She had built him a path to redemption, and right next to it, a path to annihilation. And she had waited to see which one he would be smart enough, or humble enough, to choose. He had chosen correctly, but only by accident. Only because he had no other choice. The scale of her intellect, of her foresight, was staggering. She wasn't just an archivist. She was a grandmaster, playing a game he hadn't even known he was in. He closed the laptop. He had the evidence. He had the name of his betrayer. And now, he had one last destination. One last stop on the trail she had laid for him. A temple on a mountain. A reunion. The drive to Gangwon province was a journey into silence. Jinwoo left the anonymous storage unit behind, the cold, hard data of his betrayal seared into his mind. He drove east, toward the rugged spine of the Taebaek Mountains. The urban sprawl of Seoul gave way to farmland, then to foothills, then to steep, winding mountain roads. The air grew thinner, cleaner. He was ascending. He felt a strange sense of calm. The shock of Minjun's betrayal had burned away the last of his arrogance, leaving behind a cold, clear void. He was no longer the chairman of the Unsung family. He was just a man, following the last instruction from the only person who had told him the truth. The temple was called Gwanumsa, the temple of the Bodhisattva of compassion. It was not a major tourist destination. The final road was unpaved, a narrow track clinging to the side of the mountain. He left the car at the bottom and walked the last kilometer. The path was steep, lined with ancient pines. The only sound was his own breathing and the cry of a distant hawk. He found her not in the main temple hall, but in a small, detached hermitage overlooking the valley. She was sitting on the wooden veranda, nursing a cup of tea, watching the clouds drift below. She was not hiding. She was resting. She wore simple, comfortable clothes, and her face, free from the exhaustion he had last seen on it, was serene. She looked up as he approached, her expression calm, unsurprised. "You were faster than I expected," she said. Her voice was the same, quiet and clear, but it held a new note of authority, the voice of someone who was no longer an employee. He stopped a few feet from her, not knowing what to say. "I'm sorry," felt cheap, inadequate. "Thank you," felt absurd. He was the architect of his own ruin. She had simply handed him the blueprints. He chose the only word that mattered. "Why?" he asked. His voice was rough. She took a slow sip of her tea, her eyes on the distant horizon. "For a long time," she began, "I believed my job was to organize your past, to take the chaos and create a narrative. But over time, I realized that what I was actually doing was documenting a crime. Not just the old crimes of your father and grandfather, but the new ones. The ones happening right now, under your roof." She turned to look at him, her gaze level and unflinching. "Park Min-jun was building a parasite empire inside yours. Siphoning money, yes. But more than that, he was corrupting people, forcing good people to make bad choices, threatening the livelihoods of workers who had been with your family for generations. Their pension funds were being funneled into his shell companies. They were going to be left with nothing." Her voice was devoid of melodrama. It was a statement of fact. "You didn't see it. You weren't paying attention. You were too busy looking at the map of the empire you wanted to build. He was busy poisoning the territory you already had." He sank down onto the edge of the veranda, the fight gone out of him. "Why not just tell me?" he asked, the question sounding weak even to his own ears. A small, sad smile touched her lips. "Would you have listened?" she asked softly. "If I had come to you a month ago with a folder of spreadsheets and told you that your brother, your most trusted man, was a traitor, what would you have done? You would have seen it as an accusation, not a diagnosis. You would have seen me as hysterical, or ambitious, or naive. You would have protected him, and you would have fired me. And you would have been left blind when he finally made his move." She was right. He knew she was right. It was a devastatingly accurate portrait of his own arrogance. "So you built the trail," he said, more to himself than to her. "The library card, the gallery owner, the tea master." It was a lesson. "It was a test," she corrected him gently. "I needed to know if you were capable of learning. I needed to know if the man I met on the train was still in there somewhere. The man who was quiet enough to let a stranger sleep on his shoulder. Or if he was gone forever, replaced completely by the chairman." The silence stretched between them, filled with the vastness of the mountain air. "I prepared for both outcomes," she said finally, her voice pragmatic. "Path A was for you, the evidence, the tools to fix your own house, to prove you were still the master of it." "And Path B?" he asked, though he already knew. "Path B was for Prosecutor Choi," she said simply. "If you had failed the test, if you had sent your men after me instead of following the clues yourself, I would have sent that file. It would have been my duty, to protect the innocent people Min-jin was going to destroy. My loyalty was never to the Unsung family name. It was to the hundreds of families whose lives depend on it. You had forgotten that they were the territory. I never did. He looked at her, truly saw her, for the first time since that night on the train. She was not an archivist. She was not his assistant. She was a queen. A quiet, hidden queen who had been guarding the kingdom while the king was busy admiring his own crown. "What now?" he asked. It was a genuine question. For the first time in his adult life, Kwon Jin-woo did not know what to do next. So-yeon set down her teacup. "Now," she said, her voice turning crisp and operational, "we work. Min-jun thinks you are isolated and crippled. He will be making his move soon. We are going to use the truth not as a weapon to destroy, but as a scalpel to excise a cancer. And we are going to do it together." For the first time, they were equals. The dynamic in the small hermitage shifted. The quiet recluse and the broken king became a two-person command center. The hierarchy was gone, replaced by a partnership of pure complementary competence. She possessed the data. He possessed the strategic understanding of the power structures it could dismantle. "Violence is not the answer," she said, opening a laptop she retrieved from inside. It was a clean machine, untraceable. "Min-jun expects a physical response. He's prepared for it. He thinks you will send assassins. That's the old map. We use the new one." She projected the contents of the shadow archive onto the wall. "The evidence is organized by jurisdiction," she explained, her finger tracing patterns on her trackpad. "Min-jun's crimes are not just a betrayal of you. They are violations of international law. He got greedy. He used the American banking system. He used Hong Kong's exchanges. He broke their rules, not just yours." Jin-woo leaned forward, his mind, dormant for days, snapping back into its familiar, predatory focus. But it was different now. It was sharper, cleaner, stripped of ego. He wasn't thinking about revenge. He was thinking about precision. "The U.S. Department of Justice Foreign Corrupt Practices Act," he murmured, pointing at a set of files detailing kickbacks to foreign officials. "They have a long reach and no patience for this kind of thing. An anonymous tip to the right agent in their Seoul office will trigger an immediate freeze on any of his assets that touch the dollar," So-yeon finished, already pulling up a pre-prepared contact file. It contained the name and direct, private email of a notoriously aggressive DOJ attaché in the Seoul embassy. "Hong Kong," he continued, pointing to another folder. "The securities fraud. He manipulated the stock of a shell company on the Hang Seng." "The Hong Kong Monetary Authority," she said. "They value their reputation for stability above all else. Proof of market manipulation will get him blacklisted in under 12 hours." For the next 8 hours, they worked. It was a silent, intense ballet of information and strategy. She would isolate a data packet, a set of offshore transaction codes, a recorded phone call, a falsified shipping manifest, and explain its significance. He would then identify the precise regulatory or legal pressure point it could activate. They were not leaking everything. That would be chaotic, a bomb. This was a series of surgical strikes, designed not to destroy the unsung organization, but to isolate and paralyze Min-jun's parasitic network within it. They drafted anonymous, untraceable emails, each one containing a single, perfect, irrefutable piece of evidence. They sent one to the Korean Financial Supervisory Service, detailing Min-jun's domestic tax evasion. They sent another to the banking regulators in Singapore, another to the Port Authority in Rotterdam. Each email was a seed of chaos, planted in the fertile ground of bureaucratic procedure. Each one would trigger an alarm that Min-jun, for all his cleverness, could not quietly silence. He could bribe a local cop or a prosecutor. He could not bribe the entire global financial system. As dawn approached, they sent the last email. Jinwoo leaned back, exhausted but clear-headed. He had spent his life building a fortress of power, of intimidation and fear. And here, in a mountain temple, with a laptop and a cup of tea, he and So-yeon had just launched a counterattack more devastating than any army of thugs. They had used the system, the very system he had always tried to operate outside of. "He won't see this coming," Jinwoo said. "He's expecting a knife fight in an alley. We've just declared war on him from 5 different continents." So-yeon closed the laptop. "He will know it was you," she said. "Only you and he would know where all these pressure points are." "Let him," Jinwoo said. "He needs to know that the man he thought he was betraying is not the man who is coming for him now." A new kind of respect bloomed in the space between them. He was not just following her lead anymore. He was adding his own expertise. They were building something new, together, a strategy based on truth, not force. As the sun rose over the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley, a message appeared on the encrypted messaging app So-yeon had installed on his phone. It was from his security chief, Kang. "Sir, emergency. Park Min-joon has called a meeting of all family captains, noon tomorrow, at the Sheila Hotel. He's making his move." Jinwoo read the message twice. Min-joon wasn't running. He wasn't trying to disappear with his stolen money. He was doing the one thing Jinwoo hadn't anticipated. He was launching a coup. The regulatory attacks they had launched were brilliant, but they were slow. They were bureaucratic. They would take days, weeks, to fully manifest in frozen assets and arrest warrants. Min-joon knew this. He had a window of opportunity, a space of perhaps 36 hours before his world collapsed, and he was using that window to make a direct play for power. He was gambling that he could seize control of the Unsung organization itself before the external consequences arrived. It was a bold lateral move. Instead of fleeing, he was running toward the fire, intending to take ownership of it. "He's going to declare me incompetent," Jinwoo said, his voice grim. "He'll use the frozen credit lines, the chaos from Lee Jang-ho pulling out of the Yongjong project, chaos he created, as proof that I've lost control. He'll present himself as the stable hand, the man who can guide the family through the storm." So-yeon looked at the clock on the laptop. It was 6 a.m. The meeting was in 30 hours. "The captains," she said. "They are the key. Their loyalty is what matters now." "Loyalty is a transaction," Jinwoo said, the old cynicism creeping back into his voice. "Min-joon has been buying them for years. Promises, kickbacks, covering their mistakes. I only ever gave them orders." "Then you must offer them a better transaction," she said simply. He looked at her confused. "What can I offer them? My assets are frozen. My reputation is in tatters. Min-joon can offer them stability, a piece of the empire. I can offer them nothing." "You are wrong," she said, her voice firm. She opened the laptop again, but this time she didn't go to the files on Min-joon's corruption. She went to another folder, one he hadn't seen. It was labeled personnel. Inside were not financial records, but human ones. Detailed files on every single captain in the Unsung family. Not just their business dealings, but their families, their histories, their vulnerabilities. It was the kind of deep, personal intelligence a good leader would cultivate. It was the kind of intelligence he had always delegated and then ignored. "You can't offer them money," So-yeon said, clicking open a file. "So you must offer them something else. You must offer them attention. You must offer them respect." She pointed to the screen. The file was on Captain Kim, the head of their logistics division in Incheon. A photograph showed a stern, middle-aged man, but below it were other photos. A wife, a young son, no older than 10, in a hospital bed, attached to a breathing apparatus. Captain Kim's son has a rare respiratory disease, Soyeon said softly. The medical bills are crippling him. His wife's family has disowned them. Min-jun offered to cover the costs, in exchange for his absolute loyalty in the coming transition. He made the offer last week. Jinwoo stared at the screen. He had known Kim for 15 years. He had no idea the man even had a son. Now you call him, Soyeon said, her voice a quiet command. You do not talk about the meeting. You do not talk about Min-jun. You ask him about his son. You use his son's name. His name is Min-ho. She had written it on a piece of paper and pushed it towards him. You tell him that you have been blind and deaf and that you are ashamed. You tell him that the Eun-sung family takes care of its own. You tell him that Min-ho's medical care will be covered for life. Not as a loan, not as a bribe, but because it is the right thing to do. You will give the order to your personal finance manager. It will be your last liquid asset, but you will use it for this. Jinwoo picked up his phone. His hand was trembling slightly. This was harder than negotiating a billion-dollar deal. It was more frightening than facing down a rival with a gun. It was a conversation that required not power, but humanity. He dialed the number. The clock was ticking. 30 hours. 12 captains. The arithmetic of redemption was brutal. The call to Captain Kim was the hardest of his life. The man answered, his voice wary, guarded. Sir? Captain Kim, Jinwoo began, his own voice sounding foreign to him. He took a breath. I am calling to ask about your son, Min-ho. There was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the line. Jinwoo could hear the man's breathing. How do you know his name? Kim finally stammered. I know, because I should have known years ago, Jinwoo said, the words coming out raw, unpolished. Soyeon sat across from him, her expression calm, supportive. I have been a poor leader, Kim. I have been blind. I heard about his illness, and I am ashamed that I did not act sooner. The family takes care of its own. His treatment, all of it, is covered. From my personal accounts, for as long as it takes. This is not a negotiation. It is an apology. He could hear a choked sound on the other end, the sound of a man weeping. Sir, Kim whispered, thank you. Do not thank me, Jinwoo said. Just take care of your son. He ended the call. His hands were shaking. He had just spent the last of his accessible cash, not on lawyers or weapons, but on a child's medical care. It was the single best investment he had ever made. Next, Soyeon said, her voice gentle but firm. She pulled up another file. Captain Cho, head of the nightlife division. A man known for his temper and his fierce loyalty to his own crew. The file showed that Min-jun had been systematically squeezing Cho's territory, redirecting his revenue streams, making him look weak. Jinwoo had signed off on the directives, believing Min-jun's explanation that it was a simple business optimization. Call him, Soyeon said. Admit your error. Tell him you were misled. Tell him you are restoring his territory with a formal apology to his men. Jinwoo made the call. Cho was belligerent at first, furious. Jinwoo did not argue. He did not command. He listened. He let the man vent his rage, and then, quietly, he admitted his mistake. I was wrong, Cho. I trusted the wrong man. I allowed you and your people to be disrespected. It will be corrected. The anger in Cho's voice subsided, replaced by a grudging respect. We'll see, Cho said, and hung up. It was not a promise, but it was not a rejection either. One by one they went through the list. A captain whose daughter had been rejected from a university. Jinwoo called in a personal favor, not to force her admission, but to secure her a prestigious internship with an alumni he knew. A captain whose elderly mother needed to be moved to a better care facility. Jinwoo arranged it. A captain who felt his honor had been slighted in a territorial dispute 2 years ago.